Okay, so let's come back to the UK then. And well, the empty chamber, the empty House of Commons. Of course, the Coronavirus Act was being voted on for its extension. That passed with not so much as a whimper, 334 extending the Coronavirus Act, 24 against. So the question is, where is the opposition? Before this vote was taken, there were supposed to be 80 Tories, 100 Tories that were going to rebel. But Boris Johnson, in the face of that threat of rebellion, has done a deal. So this was about the Sir Graham Brady amendment. If that had passed, it would have forced the government to put future COVID-19 decisions to a parliamentary vote. Well, then Boris has sort of caved in on that a little bit. The rebels with the opposition parties, really? Well, that's what's being said, are angry that restrictions have been implemented without being debated. And of course, Patrick, we've been talking about this over the last number of programmes, because the way that most of these new regulations are being implemented is through secondary legislation, so-called statutory instruments, which ministers are claiming for themselves on the basis of certain historical legislation. It's not really coming to Parliament for review. And in fact, I think it was on Monday's programme, David Scott was making the point that the most recent statutory instrument had been laid before Parliament on a Sunday, when of course the Commons isn't sitting. So this is ridiculous. But if you're paying attention there to what I said, 300 votes for, 24 votes again. So the question is, where is the missing 300? I hope David might have something to say about this, but to me, this is unprecedented, that 300 members of Parliament did not turn up to vote in either direction for this.
For what historically might be one of the most important legislative sessions, maybe in modern history, if you think about the ramifications of it, if you think at what's at stake in terms of precedent from a constitutional point of view, as the Walker, vice chairman of the 1922 committee, remarked in his.
Well, we're going to see that in a second.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is hugely important. How could you abscond in terms of voting? I mean, who's being counted in terms of members of Parliament on this issue? This is a massive story, in our opinion.
Right, so absolutely, this is a massive story. Now, just to answer the person in the chat box, these were not abstentions. These were people that did not turn up to vote. So let's have a look here at what Matt Hancock had said. He said, "We will consult Parliament, and wherever possible we will hold votes before such regulations come into force." So this was the government attempting to respond to the criticism. Wherever possible is what he said. This is pretty vague. It's not really much of a deal. But you mentioned Sir Charles Walker a second ago, Patrick. The debate on this bill and this act, and whether it would be renewed or not, because if you remember, it was required to be renewed every 6 months, didn't get very much time in the House of Commons. And Sir Christopher Walker was not very happy. Have a listen to this.
90 minutes to debate the renewal of an act that fundamentally has changed the nature of the relationship between the state and citizens is not good enough. And I have to say, if this is the portent of the promises to come, it's not good enough. I need, at some stage, more than 3 minutes to discuss the fundamental hardships that are going on in my constituency. The jobs that are being lost, the opportunities that are being lost, young people struggling to find work, to get back to university, to come back from university. 90 minutes is an utter disgrace. It is actually disrespectful to this House, and it is disrespectful to colleagues. And I'm sorry, Secretary of State, if I sound... Actually, I'm not sorry that I'm angry, because a lot of people in this place are angry. We want to see this virus beaten, of course we do, but it would be nice, just nice, if this House was shown some respect.
So he held it together pretty well right until the end, Patrick, but that was a man who was pretty angry. And so he's got lots to be angry about. 90 minutes to debate, that's 3 minutes each to speak, 300 MPs who didn't turn up to vote, and the question is why. Now, of course, there is an arrangement. Remember, this was not abstentions, but there is an arrangement. It's called pairing. But if we go back to 2017, here's the Financial Times making the point that the pairing arrangements had been cancelled. Now, the way that this works is that if, for example, somebody's ill and they can't get into Parliament, or they're pregnant and they're having a baby or whatever, the idea is that if you're voting one way in a parliamentary vote, through the whips, you can arrange with somebody who's voting the other way that neither of you turns up, your votes are cancelled out, therefore. Now, occasionally over the years, this has been subverted, and in fact, that subversion in one case resulted in a British government collapsing. But nonetheless, in 2017, this arrangement was cancelled. Now, I haven't been able to find anything which tells me that that was reinstated at the end of the 2017 to 2019 parliamentary session. It may well have been.
We're still looking, so if anyone has any information about that.
Absolutely. So we're putting a question mark on this. But David, let me bring you onto the programme at this point and say welcome. And I'm just really interested to get your thoughts on this situation, because first of all, this is what we're witnessing here with respect to, and in fact, this process began not with coronavirus, it actually began with Brexit, this process of sidelining Parliament. We are seeing the fundamental change in the relationship between the state and us as individuals. And we're seeing Parliament being sidelined by a dictatorial executive, and we're seeing now, it seems, MPs absolutely stepping back from their role as MPs, whether that's because they were too scared to vote against the whips, or because there was some kind of pairing agreement. This is still to be understood.
To be on, but the outrage really is that Charles Walker there needs. I mean, he's only got part of the story, hasn't he? The focus has to be on the fact that 300 MPs didn't turn up to do anything. So Parliament is being subverted, Parliament is being sidelined, the government is effectively giving Parliament and the MPs a P45. You know, they really need to wake up. But this is a twofold process. The general public are actually the ones that have been betrayed, that have voted for these MPs that purport to represent them, because there's the failure. The democratic failure is there. So I find this very, there's the focus of the outrage and the anger. It needs to come from the public back onto the MPs. You have failed to do your job, which is to represent us and protect our rights, privileges and freedoms. Absolute failure. Now, what I find shocking with this, so we've got another one of these Brexit organisations has just put this out, and I've focused on this because it kind of it's sort of going along the same lines there as we've seen from a lot of those MPs, and we've not really had the backup from the Speaker. That has, his conduct hasn't been really satisfactory to make sure that Parliament does its job, but the MPs thereby have to do their job, and they haven't. Clearly 300 of them have failed to do their job. So we've got Jonathan Isby here, who's written and arguing on a new Brexit group, by the look of it, called Politia. And he's saying that the democratic outrage is that ministers have been able to introduce new laws restricting our freedom without recourse or debate or a vote on these measures in Parliament. Well, actually, that's not really it, is it? Well, to an extent, ministers have done it. But the outrage is the MPs have failed as a whole. There is the outrage, and the public need to focus on the fact that their MP, whoever it is, has let them down. The government is simply trying it on. So, I think, credit to Sir Charles and a few of the others in there, and the 24 that voted against. But that clearly what that needed was a majority to go in there and vote this down and stop it. It's very simple. If Parliament doesn't like it, the people don't like it, and the MPs don't like it, they just say no. That's it.
Well, that indeed should be it. Now, just for the record, let's just look at who did vote against this. The Tories that voted against the whip were Peter Bone, Philip Davies, Philip Hollowbone, Esther McVeigh, Desmond Swayne, Charles Walker and William Ragg. On the Labour side, with Rebecca Long-Bailey, Dawn Butler, Kevin Jones, John Speller, Graham Stringer, and Derek Twigg. And then Caroline Lucas, who's of course Green Party, she voted against, and all the Lib Dem MPs voted against extending the legislation. So that's who voted against. Now, David just mentioned the fact that the Speaker isn't doing his job, or not doing a very good job at the moment. Here he is, Lindsay Hoyle. The way in which government has exercised its power to make secondary legislation during this crisis has been totally unsatisfactory. So he is speaking out against it, but he's not acting. He is refusing to. He is concerned that he would be perceived as being another John Bercow, and he's scared, therefore, to proceed with to allow amendments and allow emergency votes and so on. But the threat from him is there. And so he probably needs a little bit of encouragement, and maybe we need to be encouraging him to get involved in that. So, David, just briefly, finally, on Lindsay Hoyle, he has expressed concern about being perceived as being like John Bercow. This isn't really the way to do business. He's got to uphold the parliamentary rules, and he's got to stand up for Parliament. That is his job.
I absolutely agree. But what has to happen, that's brilliant, that has to happen. But what also has to happen is that there needs to be a volume of MPs press this with him, with the Speaker, to say no.
Yeah.
It's that straightforward. The public pressure needs to go onto the MPs. This is unacceptable. You are allowing government to run amok, and they are effectively now, as it's been said in there, and there's a few MPs that have said it, that this is becoming dictatorial, and that is correct. It is, making secondary instruments on a Sunday evening at 7 p.m. or something or other should leave nobody in any misapprehension as just what the status of affairs is. But this is where the focus has got to go. Public to the MPs, MP into the House and the Speaker, and they have got to muster and say no.
Yeah.
This carries on much longer. We won't have a functioning democracy, or a functioning that won't be a government. It'll be something else.
Well, I think we're already at that point, David. Sorry, Patrick.
And I just want to add, I think it's incumbent on people who are constituents to find out, where your MP was during this vote.
Yes.
And to further on to what David said, not just even if they're voting it down, but even if they're voting in support of it, it would be good for constituents to know where their member of parliament stands, one way or the other. Isn't that how democracy is supposed to work? And right now we have this giant black hole. This is just gaping void in terms of knowing where people stand on this, what could be historically one of the most important constitutional pieces of legislation ever.